9 experienced hikers, one mountain, one freezing February night in 1959. When rescuers finally found their campsite weeks later, the tent had been sliced open from the inside. Boots, coats, and supplies were still neatly inside. Yet the hikers had fled into temperatures below -20 degrees Celsius, many barefoot, and none of them survived. More than 60 years later, one question still echoes across the frozen Ural Mountains. What made them leave that tent? On January 23, 1959, the expedition departed Sverdlovsk by train to reach beyond Vijay that stretched hundreds of miles of forests, rivers, and mountains. There would be no roads, no rescue teams, no communication, only snow. The team originally set out with 10 members. Leading the group was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, accompanied by Rustem Slobodin, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Yuri Doroshenko, Georgy Krivonishenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Yuri Yudin. These were not amateur adventurers. They were among the Soviet Union's most experienced winter hikers. Every member of the expedition had completed demanding backcountry treks, often in extreme conditions. The journey was expected to take several weeks. The hikers documented nearly everything. They kept journals, took photographs, recorded daily progress. Nothing suggests conflict. Nothing indicates they believed they were in danger. A few days into their hike, Yudin, the youngest member of the group, developed severe pain in his joints shortly after the journey began. Realizing he could not continue, the 10th member reluctantly turned back. As he said goodbye, he had no way of knowing he would become the only survivor. For the rest of his life, Yuri Yudin would carry one question that no one has ever been able to answer. What happened to his friends? The hikers were expected to return by February 12th. When no message arrived, friends initially weren't concerned. Delays were common. But as the days passed, concern turned into panic. On February 20th, search teams were finally organized. Students, volunteers, soldiers, even aircraft joined the search. 6 days later, they found the tent. On February 26th, a search team spotted something on the windswept slope of Kholat Syakhl. It was the hiker's tent, half buried beneath drifting snow. From a distance, it looked almost untouched. But as the rescuers got closer, something felt terribly wrong. The entrance wasn't open. Instead, the canvas had been slashed open from the inside. Inside the tent were the hikers' backpacks, their food, their journals, their cameras. Everything they would have needed to survive the freezing night had been left behind. If they had fled, why hadn't they taken even the basics? Outside the tent, investigators noticed another chilling clue. A single trail of footprints leading downhill toward a dark forest roughly a mile away. The prints weren't scattered. They weren't the marks of people running in panic. They appeared to belong to people walking. Calmly, the searchers followed them. The trail eventually disappeared beneath wind-blown snow. Beyond that point, there was only silence. Then, at the edge of the forest, they found the first bodies. 2 hikers, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko, lay beneath a towering cedar tree. They were dressed only in underwear and socks. Nearby were the remains of a small campfire. The branches above them were broken several meters up the trunk, suggesting that at least one of them had climbed the tree, perhaps trying to spot the tent in the darkness. But the mystery only deepened. Between the cedar tree and the abandoned tent, searchers discovered Igor Dyatlov. His body was positioned facing uphill toward the tent. It appeared he had been trying to make it back. Over the next several days, 2 more bodies were found along the same path, First came Zinaida Kolmogorova, then Rustem Slobodin. Each lay closer to the tent than the last, as though the hikers had become separated while desperately attempting to return. 5 of the 9 hikers had now been found, but 4 were still missing. The search continued for weeks. Snowstorms buried the landscape beneath meters of fresh snow, making every step more difficult. It wasn't until May 4th, more than 3 months after the hikers disappeared, that rescuers finally made another discovery. Hidden beneath nearly 4 meters of packed snow inside a nearby ravine, they found the remaining 4 hikers: Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov. Unlike the first 5, these bodies told a very different story. Several had suffered devastating internal injuries, broken ribs, a crushed skull, yet remarkably, very few external wounds. It was a discovery that transformed the case from a tragic survival story into one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. At first, investigators believed the case was becoming clearer. 5 of the hikers had died from hypothermia after spending hours exposed to brutal winter conditions. It was tragic, but understandable. Then the autopsy reports arrived, and everything changed. The first 5 victims showed a relatively few injuries: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Yuri Doroshenko, Georgy Krivonishenko, and Rustem Slobodin. All had ultimately died from hypothermia. Slobodin did have a small fracture to his skull, but medical examiners determined it wasn't severe enough to have caused his death. The evidence suggested they had frozen while desperately trying to survive. Then investigators examined the 4 hikers found in the ravine. The results stunned everyone. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had suffered a massive skull fracture. The force was so great that medical examiners believed it would have required an extraordinary impact. Semyon Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs across one side of his chest. The injuries were severe enough to crush his rib cage. Lyudmila Dubinina had suffered multiple broken ribs on both sides of her chest. The damage was catastrophic. Yet despite these devastating injuries, there were remarkably few external wounds. No deep cuts, no signs of a prolonged fight, no evidence that another person had beaten them. The medical examiner later wrote that the amount of force required was comparable to that seen in victims of major automobile accidents. But in 1959, there were no roads, no vehicles, nothing capable of producing injuries like these. Then there was another detail that fueled decades of speculation. When Lyudmila Dubinina's body was recovered, much of her tongue was missing. Parts of her lips and soft facial tissue were also gone. Semyon Zolotaryov was missing both eyes. At first glance, the discovery seemed horrifying, but forensic experts believe these injuries most likely occurred after death. The 4 hikers had spent more than 3 months beneath snow and icy water in the ravine. Soft tissue is often the first to decompose or be consumed by natural scavengers. While unsettling, these findings are not considered evidence of torture or ritual violence. Another discovery added one final layer to the mystery. Several pieces of clothing showed traces of radioactive contamination. The levels were low, and investigators never established a definitive source. Some of the clothing belonged to Georgy Krivonishenko, who had previously worked at a nuclear facility involved in the cleanup following the 1957 Kishtim disaster. Whether the contamination was connected to the hikers' deaths or simply unrelated background exposure has never been conclusively determined. By the time the autopsies were complete, investigators had more questions than answers. 9 experienced hikers had abandoned their shelter. 5 had frozen to death. 3 had suffered crushing internal injuries. And none of the evidence pointed to a single obvious explanation. The mystery was only beginning. Why was the tent cut from the inside? Why were they walking instead of running? Why leave boots behind? Why were branches broken 15 feet up the tree? Why were some hikers wearing each other's clothes? Why were the last 4 in the ravine? What did the cameras and journals reveal? So many puzzling questions with so little explanation. The first clue was the tent itself. Investigators determined the fabric had been cut from the inside, not once, but multiple times. Whatever happened, the hikers believed getting out immediately was more important than using the entrance. Yet once outside, they didn't run. The footprints leading away from the tent told a different story. Searchers documented 8 to 9 sets of tracks stretching down the mountainside toward the forest. Some prints were left by people wearing socks, others were barefoot. A few appeared to be wearing only a single boot. But perhaps the strangest detail was the pace. The footprints didn't show signs of panic. There was no evidence of a chaotic stampede. Instead, the hikers appeared to walk, as if they believed they had time, as if they expected to return. Their trail ended beneath that massive cedar tree, where the investigators found the remains of their small fire. Someone had tried to stay alive? Only a mile from the tent, where everything they needed was waiting for them. The tree itself told another story. Large branches had been snapped several meters above the ground. It appeared at least one of the hikers had climbed high into the tree. To escape something? To look for the tent? Or to search for the others? No one knows. Then there was the clothing. Some of the hikers found later in the ravine were wearing clothing that belonged to those who had already died. At first glance, it sounded suspicious, but investigators believe the surviving hikers likely removed clothing from their friends in a desperate attempt to stay warm. In temperatures approaching minus 30 degrees Celsius, every extra layer could mean the difference between life and death. Investigators also examined the hikers' cameras and journals. The final photographs showed no signs of panic, no arguments, no injuries, no indication that anything unusual had happened before they pitched their tent. The last journal entries were ordinary, routine, even cheerful. Whatever happened, it happened suddenly. Then there were the reports of strange lights. Around the same time as the incident, several people in the region reported seeing glowing orange spheres crossing the night sky. Some believed they were connected to secret military testing. Others dismissed them as unrelated atmospheric or rocket phenomena. To this day, no direct evidence has ever linked the lights to the hikers' deaths. And finally, there was the official conclusion. After months of investigation, the Soviet prosecutor closed the case with a single sentence. The hikers had died because of an unknown compelling force. No further explanation. No definitive cause. The files were archived. The mountain fell silent once again. But for decades, people around the world have tried to answer the question the investigators never could. What really happened on Dyatlov Pass? Could it have been nature? A natural phenomenon that sent them out in the cold? A military accident kept secret? Or something much stranger? If the hikers fled because of immediate danger, the most obvious explanation is an avalanche. They had camped on a slope. They cut into the snow to pitch the tent. Modern research suggests a delayed slab avalanche is physically possible. It could explain why they exited quickly, but the tent wasn't buried under a large avalanche. The footprints remained visible. Searchers didn't report classic large avalanche debris, and some experienced mountaineers argue the slope wasn't steep enough for a typical avalanche. Another theory has persisted for decades. What if they weren't alone on the mountain? The Soviet Union in 1959 was at the height of the Cold War. Large areas of the Ural Mountains were used for military research, weapons development, and missile testing. Much of that activity remains classified even today. Not long after the tragedy, rumors began to spread. Some witnesses reported seeing glowing orange lights in the night sky around the same time the hikers disappeared. Others claimed they heard distant explosions echoing through the mountains. Could the hikers have stumbled into a secret military exercise? One of the most discussed possibilities involves parachute mines. Unlike conventional bombs, parachute mines are designed to descend slowly before detonating above the ground. The resulting shockwave can travel across a wide area. Supporters of this theory argue that such a blast could explain why several hikers suffered devastating internal injuries while showing relatively few external wounds. A powerful explosion in the darkness could also explain why the group fled their tent so quickly. But the theory has serious problems. Investigators found no evidence of bomb fragments, no blast crater, no scorched trees, no widespread burn damage to the surrounding area. The hikers' cameras contained no photographs suggesting military activity. And despite decades of speculation, no official records have surfaced confirming that weapons tests took place on Kholat Syakhl that night. Then there was the radiation. Investigators detected low levels of radioactive contamination on some pieces of clothing. To some conspiracy theorists, this seemed like proof of a military cover-up. As for the glowing lights, several witnesses did report seeing bright orange spheres over the northern Urals in early 1959. Exactly what they saw remains uncertain. Some researchers believe the lights were distant rocket launches or other atmospheric phenomena. Others argue they have no connection to the incident at all. To this day, no direct evidence links military activity to the deaths of the Dyatlov group. The theory remains intriguing, but unproven. Still, if it wasn't an avalanche, and it wasn't the military, what else could have happened on that frozen mountainside? One of the most unusual scientific theories involves something humans can't even hear: infrasound. These are extremely low-frequency sound waves produced by certain natural events, including powerful winds moving across mountain terrain. Some researchers have suggested that under the right conditions, wind passing over Kholat Syakhl could have generated infrasound strong enough to trigger feelings of anxiety, panic, dizziness, or overwhelming fear. If true, the hikers may have experienced an intense psychological reaction with no obvious cause, prompting them to leave the tent in confusion. It's an intriguing idea. But there's a problem. There is very little direct evidence that naturally occurring infrasound can cause the kind of extreme behavior described in this case. No physical evidence from the scene supports the theory, and it does nothing to explain the devastating injuries suffered by 3 of the hikers. While scientifically interesting, most experts consider infrasound an unlikely explanation on its own. Another theory points not to sound, but to the wind itself. Katabatic winds occur when dense, freezing air rushes downhill under the force of gravity. In some regions of the world, these winds can become incredibly powerful, strong enough to flatten tents, rip away equipment, and make it nearly impossible to stand. Supporters believe the hikers may have abandoned their tent temporarily to escape dangerous conditions, expecting to return once the wind subsided, but they never found their way back. The theory helps explain why the group stayed together. It also fits with the harsh weather reported in the area. However, there is no direct evidence that a katabatic wind event occurred on Kholat Syakhl that night. And like the infrasound theory, it still doesn't account for the severe internal injuries found during the autopsies. Perhaps the most famous theory is also the least supported. Over the years, stories emerged claiming the hikers had been attacked by a creature lurking in the mountains. The legend grew after one of the hikers jokingly wrote in a journal about the abominable snowman. That single joke, combined with the mystery surrounding the deaths, was enough to fuel decades of speculation. But investigators found no unusual footprints, no hair, no DNA, no evidence whatsoever that another creature was present. Today, the Yeti theory is widely regarded as modern folklore rather than a serious explanation. One other theory that circulates around those reported glowing lights: UFO. Several witnesses reported seeing glowing orange objects in the sky around the time of the incident. To some, the connection seemed obvious. Unknown lights, missing hikers, an unexplained tragedy. Some of the pieces appeared to fit, but appearances can be deceiving. No physical evidence at the scene suggested extraterrestrial involvement. The hikers' cameras captured nothing unusual, and no credible investigation has ever produced evidence linking UFOs to the events on Dyatlov Pass. The lights remain an interesting mystery, but they are not enough evidence of alien activity to most. Theory after theory. Yet no evidence to confidently give any answers to what those hikers went through that night. Perhaps we'll never know. What we do know is this: 9 people set out on a journey they had every reason to believe they would complete. They were experienced, prepared, confident, but somewhere on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, their story came to an end. Only one member of the expedition survived, not because he escaped the mountain, but because he never reached it. Yuri Yudin's severe joint pain that made it impossible for him to continue and forced him to return home was a decision that ended up save his life. For the rest of his life, Yudin carried the weight of being the lone survivor. Years later, he was asked what question he would ask if he had the chance. His answer has become one of the most haunting reflections connected to this case. If I had a chance to ask God just one question, it would be, what really happened to my friends that night? It's a question that has echoed across generations. And it's the same question we're left asking today. Maybe the answer lies somewhere beneath decades of speculation. Maybe it's hidden in evidence we've misunderstood. Or maybe the mountain has kept its secret. What do you think happened on that cold February night in 1959? Which explanation is the most convincing? Or is there another theory that better fits the evidence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear which you find most believable and why. If you enjoyed this investigation and want to see more documentaries exploring history's greatest unsolved mysteries, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Echoes of Fear, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, some mysteries never truly disappear. The mountain fell silent, but the mystery still echoes.